Welcome to this course on Haridas Chaudhuri and Sri Aurobindo's Integral Yoga. This is the first lecture of the course. This course was designed to bring CIIS students to an understanding of Haridas Chaudhuri's philosophy. Haridas Chaudhuri, as the founder of CIIS, started CIIS in 1951 as the American Academy of Asian Studies. And then this particular incarnation folded up and it restarted as the California Institute of Asian Studies. And after Haridas Chaudhuri left his body, this institute was renamed the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is what it is called today. But the change in name occurred because as the institute progressed, a number of psychological courses had begun, the number of Asian courses had diminished. And so when we sought accreditation, the accreditors felt that it was more appropriate to designate the new nature of the institute in a way that was more representative. And so the idea of changing from Asian studies to integral studies occurred at that time. And the word integral was chosen because that was the philosophy that Haridas Chaudhuri endorsed, the philosophy of integralism, as he called it himself. But the word takes its roots in Haridas Chaudhuri's own spiritual practice, which is a practice based on the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. And this course is an opportunity for us to put our attention on what that was, what were Haridas Chaudhuri's understandings of the term integral, and why it is, in a sense, the heart of our institute today as the California Institute of Integral Studies. So, as part of the purpose of this course, apart from understanding the views of Haridas Chaudhuri, as well as the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, our purpose, our aim is to focus on this term integral and see what Haridas Chaudhuri meant by it, what Sri Aurobindo meant by it, and what we can make of it today in our lives and as far as our school is concerned. So this is, in a way, the purpose and the motivation for this course. Haridas Chaudhuri wrote a number of books on Sri Aurobindo and the integral yoga. This was the mainstay of his own teaching, the integral yoga. We will consider three of the principal books that he wrote. The first one is called Sri Aurobindo, the Prophet of the Life Divine. The second one is called Integral Yoga. And the third one is called Being, Evolution, and Immortality. So these are the three books that we'll consider. And we're going to start with the book Sri Aurobindo, the Prophet of Life Divine. And then we'll move on to Integral Yoga and Being, Evolution, and Immortality. Now, there are a lot of overlaps between these books, particularly the first and second book. But I feel that in our reconsideration of what ideas are being presented in these books, it'll only serve us a greater attention to the ideas so that we may assimilate them in a more considered manner. So please bear with me and go through these texts as we are going through them, sometimes in a fashion in which you will reconsider the things that you have already studied, but I think in a way in which it can be assimilated better. Today, we will talk about the first of these texts, Sri Aurobindo, the Prophet of Life Divine, And we will consider the first 3 chapters of this book. The first 3 chapters are the scope of our consideration for the first week of this course. So, in his study of Sri Aurobindo, the title of the book may make us think that it's a biography, Sri Aurobindo, the Prophet of Life Divine, but actually it's not a biography. It's a study of 2 principal works of Sri Aurobindo, the Life Divine and the Synthesis of Yoga. The Life Divine is the philosophical mainstay of Sri Aurobindo, and the Synthesis of Yoga is his work on yoga. And so when we say integral yoga, one thing to realize is that both these terms are extremely inviting as far as their content. Integral, as I said, is the name of CIIS, has its name in CIIS. And integral is what we'll be considering. So it's a term that will we will have much occasion to dwell on. The other term, when we are talking about integral yoga, is the word yoga. So here is where the question may arise as to when we are saying integral studies, what is yoga and how does it relate to our institute, California Institute of Integral Studies? As I mentioned right in the beginning, that there was a shift from California Institute of Asian Studies to California Institute of Integral Studies. And the reason for that shift is that the number of departments that were putting their focus on Asian studies had diminished. And instead of that, there were a number of departments putting their attention on psychological studies, on the whole issue of psychology, of human psychology. So how does that relate to yoga or integral yoga? Is it just a happenstance? Well, no. The first thing to realize is that Sri Aurobindo conceived of yoga as a psychology. And he has an explicit sentence in the book, The Synthesis of Yoga, where he says, yoga is nothing but practical psychology. Now, the term practical psychology means, in today's term, since Sri Aurobindo and even since Haridas Chaudhuri, we have coined terms in the field of psychology that approximate this idea. One of them is transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology looks at the human psyche not in terms of what we receive as our common understanding or even empirical understanding of the human psyche, but in a way, a universal or cosmic kind of psychology, a psychology in which the individual merges with the cosmic consciousness. So that is one aspect of psychology that has changed, and CIIS is particularly interested in that kind of transpersonal understanding of psychology. The other is the term transformational psychology, and that is in a way more appropriate to yoga. A transformational psychology means a psychology that does not consider the human psyche to be something fixed. It isn't given, but we don't accept what we are, but we try to become what we hold out as the goal of what will solve our problems. So the psyche is something that is in a process of transformation. So it is in this sense that integral studies can be thought of as studies towards the making of a new human, the making of a being that can transform the human idea of humanism to something that is more appropriate to answering the problems of our time. What do we need to become? This is the idea of a yoga psychology. And the idea of an integral psychology, sometimes the term whole person psychology is used for it. A whole person psychology is a psychology that considers the whole being, not just a part of the being, not just the mind or the body or the emotions, but the whole person. So integral psychology is something that takes us not merely as some partial consciousness, but as a whole being. Even whole person psychology, I think, does not do full justice to the notion of integral psychology. And that is part of our aim here. We are looking for the understanding of a yoga psychology, which is a transpersonal and transformative psychology, a psychology that will make us adequate to the problems of our time, become something new, as well as something that is whole, that involves, integrates all the fragmented parts of our being and of the world itself. So this is something that we need to put our attention on in this course. This book begins with a chapter on the life of Sri Aurobindo. So that's the first chapter, the life of Sri Aurobindo. In that chapter, Haridas Chaudhuri gives us a short view of what is this is the book, a short view of what is the life of Sri Aurobindo. But in fact, that chapter itself, to a large extent, can feed into the idea of integral yoga, because Sri Aurobindo's life is the life of somebody who is the founder of integral yoga. His life is integral yoga from a certain point of view. So when you read that chapter, note the way in which Haridas Chaudhuri has divided the life of Sri Aurobindo. First, he talks about his upbringing. Sri Aurobindo is an Indian who is born in the city of Calcutta, which is a capital of the colonial occupiers of India at that time, the British. And he is born into a family of a doctor, and his doctor father is a Anglophile. In other words, it's a part of the culture of colonized India at that time, and particularly colonized Calcutta, which is the capital of the British, that already in 1872, when Sri Aurobindo was born, there is the idea that a, a cultural stir is taking place in Calcutta, where there are people re-evaluating their own culture. And some people are thinking about it in terms of reform, that we need to reform our culture to become adequate to the ideals and values of the West. And some people are thinking about it in terms of renaissance. We need to be born anew to the values of our own past, not a slavish imitation, not a revival, but a rebirth, which means something which gives a new formulation to the problems of our time. So Sri Aurobindo is born in that particular milieu and time, and his father is more of the first type. He wishes to see change in the way in which Indians live, and he thinks that the ideals and values of the British are far superior to Indians, and he sends his three elder sons to England to study. So that's the first chapter in Sri Aurobindo's life. He's brought up in England under hard conditions because his father at a certain point stopped sending them money, and he has to fend for himself. But he studies in one of the best schools in London, St. Paul's School, and in one of the best universities in the world, that's Cambridge University. And he is at that time he receives what we may call today a modern education that makes him familiar with the values of the Enlightenment and with the values of the ideals of the West. He also becomes very familiar with classical literature because what he studies at Cambridge are the classics. So this classics is a discipline where you study mainly Greek and Latin and also some Sanskrit, these are Indo-European classical languages. So Sri Aurobindo is very well versed with Greek ancient philosophy in the original. He gets the highest grades in Greek and Latin. And also he verses himself in all the modern European languages like German, Italian, and to some extent Spanish, but particularly German and Italian, and of course English and French. He masters these languages and he reads all the philosophy and literature. He's very deeply interested in literature of all these languages. So that's the first period in Sri Aurobindo's life. Then he goes on to take on service under one of the princely states of India, of Western India, of the Maharaja of Baroda. And that's where he comes in 1893. And what happens then is that he both becomes very acutely aware of the colonized situation of India. And his response to it is twofold. One line of his response is that this is diametrically opposed to the ideals of the West itself, the ideals of the Enlightenment, which are the ideals of freedom, the ideals of individual and human rights and freedom. That is completely opposed to colonization. And the other line in which he sees it is that even if that were not the case, people who have a history of their own should have the right of self-determination. And that's why they need freedom, they need liberation. So this launches him into two lines of both study and action, activism. One is he delves deep into Sanskritic literature of the past. And this is, as I said, part of the Indian and particularly Bengali Renaissance, how to re-evaluate the past and how to bring that into engagement with the present. So he delves deep into the literary and spiritual texts of the past. And the other line of action is that he becomes an early nationalist and he makes a call for complete freedom, political freedom of the nation, and starts his movement of activism against the British. So this is the second chapter in Sri Aurobindo's life. It takes him out of service of the Baroda king and into the city of Calcutta, back to the city of Calcutta, where he becomes a teacher, a professor, and the vice principal of, actually the principal of the National College in Calcutta, set up by nationalists, and also launches this revolutionary movement to overthrow the British. Now, the third aspect of Sri Aurobindo's life begins at this point, and that is yoga. And that happens, Haridas Chaudhuri is one of the few people who points out very correctly why that happens. That happens for two reasons. One is that Sri Aurobindo encounters some examples of supernormal powers. He also, in Baroda, begins to have extraordinary experiences. And these experiences include, cases of the descent of a powerful silence, which he experienced the moment he came to India from England and got off the ship. And then it was repeated in certain other occasions. When he went to a temple, he saw a living universal consciousness in the idol over there, the icon figure of Kali. And he had some other experiences where he suddenly became, as it were, a greater being than what he took himself to be. So he had a few extraordinary, unbidden experiences of this kind. And then he encountered some examples of paranormal experience. And in the circles of these nationalist movement figures, activists, there were some, what today we call yogis, that were also wishing for the freedom of India. So they were involved, with these circles, as it were. And Sri Aurobindo went to one of these yogis. He was introduced to one of them and asked him to tutor him in his path. Again, what were his goals? What was he looking for? So as Haridas Chaudhuri points out, he was looking for two things. He was looking for power. He was looking to see whether paranormal powers actually exist and whether they can be utilized to gain freedom from the British. See, this is a kind of a very interesting aspect of human power, which is that whenever we are in a situation where we are outnumbered, outarmed, outmaneuvered, out-resourced, we have to look for resources within ourselves. And these resources within ourselves can be forms of power that are latent in us. And this is exactly what Sri Aurobindo was exploring through this contact with the yogi. And the second aspect was clear direction, because we are full of confusion. We don't see with clarity. If we can even see with clarity the forces that are availing in our own time, we can see the trajectory of those forces and what I should do to bring certain results into manifestation. So for clarity in direction and for the possibility of paranormal experience, Sri Aurobindo went to a yogi, and it wasn't as if he was looking for a particular experience, but within a very short time, during that tutelage of meditation, Sri Aurobindo experienced what has been called nirvana, what he called himself the nirvana. The nirvana, which is a sense of the unreality of the world, a sense that everything is unreal, but there is something permanent behind the unreality of the world. So this was the beginning of his life as a yogi. And the nationalism after that was a kind of short-lived period, because part of this experience also opened him to the direction that he sought. He sought clarity in direction, and he got it. So it's as if he was being directed by a variety of means to do certain things from step to step, and he could see with clarity why it is that he was supposed to do it. And these directives were given the name Adesh. This is a Sanskrit term, Adesh. And so Sri Aurobindo uses this term. Adesh means command. So it's like an inner command, something from within that is showing him what is to be done, the next step to be taken. And this is what guides him, it's guidance that from that point on. Now, within a year of this experience, Sri Aurobindo was put in jail. And this is that third part that Haridas Chaudhuri is talking about. And he was put in jail for a year. And during this period, he had significant spiritual experiences. And at the end of that period, he left politics, moved to the French colony of Chandannagar, and then to another French colony, the colony of Pondicherry in 1910. And that began the fourth chapter of his life. This fourth chapter of his life is a continuation of the third chapter, Sri Aurobindo, the yogi. But what adds to this is the yoga develops a very clear direction, and there are people who gather around him to learn from him. And a very significant event occurs where a French couple, and particularly the lady in the couple, that is her with the name Mira Alfasa, joins him and becomes his collaborator and spiritual partner. And he designates her with the name the Mother. And together they form an ashram, and that ashram is there to this day. Haridas Chaudhuri himself had close connections with both Sri Aurobindo and the Mother and the Sri Aurobindo ashram. And it is at that ashram that what one might call the principal founder, the original founder of the idea of CIIS, whose name is Frederick Spiegelberg, met Sri Aurobindo. And when he came back to America, he was a professor at Stanford. He was contacted by a patron who wanted him to start a university that would bring the spiritual knowledge of the East into contact with modern America. And so this is the beginning, and this is how he contacted Sri Aurobindo. And out of that connection, Haridas Chaudhuri was sent to start that university. So this is the ashram we are talking about. Now, this, in a nutshell, is the life of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo lived in that ashram and conducted his yoga for the descent of the supermind. Now, this term, which seems very esoteric, has a very principal bearing on what we are talking about, because the word integral takes its first definition from this term. The integral consciousness is the consciousness of the supermind. And so here is where we are going to focus to some extent on what this means. And in this first chapter, Haridas Chaudhuri talks about the yoga of Sri Aurobindo in a concise form by reducing it to 4 realizations. So these 4 realizations and how that relates to the supermind is important. And these 4 realizations that he ends the first chapter with are first, the realization of what Sri Aurobindo called the passive Brahman. The passive Brahman. Brahman is a term from the Upanishads, some of the earliest spiritual texts of India. And the term can literally mean all of reality, conscious reality, reality as a conscious being. That is Brahman. So we may say, what is Brahman? Everything is Brahman. Everything that exists, that has come into existence, and that has not come into existence. It is all Brahman. Brahman is conscious being. In fact, the definition of Brahman will say Brahman is conscious being and non-being, and it is beyond being and non-being. So, Sat Asat Rupam, its forms are being and non-being. Sat Asat Atitam, it is beyond being and non-being. So in any case, Brahman is all there is. And Sri Aurobindo was saying his first realization was the passive Brahman. The passive Brahman is referring to this nirvana experience that we talked about, in which there's something passive, something which is transcendental, extra cosmic, outside everything, and yet it exists. Everything is sensed to be unreal, but something is there outside everything that is real. This is the first realization of Sri Aurobindo. The second realization he calls the active Brahman, which is what he had in the jail. The active Brahman has two aspects to it. Firstly, it's a cosmic consciousness. There is one being or one existence that is this entire cosmos. That is one aspect of it. All the beings and fragmentation that we experience are the self-manifestations of that one being. That is one aspect of the active Brahman. The other aspect of the active Brahman is not only are all these beings self-formulations of the one being, but that one being exists within each of these beings. It is the one who has become many and exists as the many. So these two sides, these two experiences Sri Aurobindo had in the jail. The third realization is what he calls Parabrahman. Parabrahman means Supreme Brahman. He says Parabrahman with the active and the passive sides as its two sides. So there is a being to which this passive Brahman, which is extra cosmic, transcendentally infinite, unknowable, outside everything, is one aspect, one side of it. The other is that this infinite store, as it were, is becoming the cosmos. So the becoming of this infinite passive Brahman is the active Brahman. They are both two sides of the Para-Brahman, or the transcendental Brahman. That's his third realization. Now, the fourth realization is really interesting, and Haridas does not, in this book, and particularly this chapter, doesn't go very deep into it, though he talks about it. It is the fact that between who we are in our everyday experience, if we think about these grand cosmic experiences, we'll realize that who we are as we are given and as we experience things, we experience a fragmented world. We experience a world in which we exist as the individual center of experience, and around us there are many other individual such centers of experience. So this is our ordinary experience. If we are talking about cosmic experiences, like there is a transcendental consciousness behind everything, or everything is a self-formulation of the active Brahman, these are far from what we are actually experiencing. Leave alone the third realization, where you see there's one Supreme Brahman with two sides, the passive and the active side. To get to this, we need to be exalted beyond ourselves into an altered state of consciousness. And even if we become altered in another state of consciousness, to make that into our common experience is very difficult. It is very difficult, and we'll see why it's very difficult. We enter into these exalted states and we return. They are sometimes called peak experiences. We have a peak experience and then we come back to our ordinary fragmented experience. Or we may have one side, like he's talking about the two sides. We may have one side of the experience and the other is not known by us. Or we may have both, but one is predominant and the other is a subordinate experience. We don't seem to have an integral experience. An integral experience would be the experience of Parabrahman. One experience in which all these exist, not as inclusive, but as almost with equal right of existence, something that the mind cannot really fathom because the mind works by dividing things. So Sri Aurobindo, the fourth realization of Sri Aurobindo was that the reason that we don't have that experience as our abiding normal experience is that our evolution is not complete. Is that who we are and where we are, there are rungs and ranges of consciousness beyond us that are forming a continuity between what we are and the Parabrahman. That is what he will call supermind, that Parabrahman state. So there's a continuity of states of consciousness between our ordinary consciousness and that. And it is only if we can normalize this ladder of continuity that it's possible for us to have that integral experience. So it's really that becomes the work of Sri Aurobindo. This realization that there is this ladder of unfinished evolution of cosmic ranges of consciousness, and that we can grow into that, becomes the foundation of the remainder of his life in Pondicherry as a yoga. Now, the other aspect of it is that even if an individual can do that, can stabilize these intermediate ranges of consciousness and arrive at an integral consciousness, can that become the normal state for others? Can the cosmic ontology change to that? We'll see in a moment, as Haridas Chaudhuri continues in this book, what that means, why it's difficult, and how it is to come about. But this is the discovery of Sri Aurobindo, that if it were to be possible to build that particular continuity in an individual, it may also be possible to bring that particular influence of the Parabrahman, of the Supreme Brahman, into the earth as a catalyst towards spiritual evolution. And that evolution, for those who accepted to allow it to work in them and who took the steps towards it, could lead to a collective ontology, a change in the very nature of our experience, where we as humans would enter into a post-human condition that might be called a supramental existence, or what Sri Aurobindo calls a divine life. So this is, in essence, the stakes that Haridas Chaudhuri sets up when he's talking about the life of Sri Aurobindo. Now, the second chapter in this book is called The Philosophy of Divine Life. So in this chapter, Haridas Chaudhuri is drawing on Sri Aurobindo's major philosophical book text called The Life Divine. And as he points out over there, that book feels a lot of the things we have just talked about. It feels the fact that we see things, experience things as contradictions, either even in terms of our ideologies. Either we go through a period where the world seems like an illusion, like he himself experienced. And culturally speaking, if we look at the spiritual philosophies of India, there is a predominance of this view that the world as we know it is secondary or illusionary, etc., and a spiritual reality is primary, and that is the true reality that we ought to enter into. On the other hand, you have our own age, the modern age, which takes its beginnings in the Enlightenment of the 17th century, which is a reaction against the church and against religion, and hence is a materialistic age, ideologically materialistic, philosophically materialistic, because matter is the foundation of that age. It's also experientially materialistic because it shears away all the values related to anything deeper in life. It is just matter and having and possessing matter that become the meaning of life. That is materialism in a existential sense. So this kind of view is another ideological view, which in a sense is the diametric opposite of an illusionistic view. And we find ourselves in spaces, in times, veering towards one of these views or towards other views. And each of these views becomes an ideological foundation of attachment. We see the world like that, we take that to be the assumption, and we proceed along those lines. Now, each individual has aspirations. So that's why the Life Divine begins with a chapter called the Human Aspiration. That somewhere, all these divisions that we experience, these are ontological divisions, ideological divisions, but we are experiencing other very fundamental divisions. The most fundamental ontological division that we experience is something I've already touched on. It is the fact that the world exists for us with ourselves at its center. Only we ourselves are really real in our experience. Everything else is really an image that we are taking in. We are assuming that the people we talk to are real. We cannot deny it because they can hurt us, but it's only because of that. They can give us pleasure or they can hurt us. It translates itself to personal experience. And it's because we are at the center of that experience that we can give some value to it. All our experience is based on I and the other. This is one aspect of the same kind of othering, the same kind of dividing, of fragmentation as the ontological center of our experience. If we go even further and look at our own experience, what we are calling us ourselves, we see that we are made up of multiple parts. These multiple parts are also living a compromised existence among themselves. The body wants to sleep, but our mind wants to force it to do something at the time when it's tired. Our desires force us to pursue certain goals that some other part of the mind, for example, doesn't like, abhors, in fact. And yet we listen to one or the other voice, and it's like a cacophony inside us that is driving us along like a kind of a set of companions that are arguing with each other, but somehow moving forward. So these forms of division are our normal experience. And Sri Aurobindo will say that what we normally do about it is either try to find a mental solution or accept a compromise of some kind, or just choose one over the other and lead our lives according to that. We see this also with regard to our spiritual experiences. We find that world religions have got a variety of different experiences that they affirm. Inside India itself, you have so many spiritual schools. They're not the same. Each one has a different goal, and each one has a different experience at the end. So this division, these distinct, discrete differences, how do we make sense of it? Is it ever possible to unite them? This is the problem of the integral. So here, Haridas Chaudhuri is going to say, Sri Aurobindo, the first thing Sri Aurobindo says about these distinctions is that it's not really the dialectical method by which we come to unity. We come to unity by coming into contact with reality as a spectrum. Reality is a undivided whole that has made itself into a continuum of different types of consciousness. This continuum of consciousness is what we need to understand. And we need to actually, as we said, when Sri Aurobindo was talking about the unfinished evolution of man, we need to go further than where we are right now to include within that continuum a range of connections that will lead us to an undivided or integral consciousness. And in talking about this, we come to this notion of the kinds of consciousness, which will be more important in the rest of our studies. But Haridas Chaudhuri hones in on one of these kinds of consciousness as the source of this difficulty that we are talking about. And here is where the notion of the supermind comes in, and also the notion of what is called the overmind. So we can see, for example, that in evolution, there have emerged new forms of consciousness. A material world has evolved life in it. Life is a difference in kind from matter without life. The rational mind, or even before the rational mind, any kind of mental activity is a difference in kind from the activity of life without mind in it. So these are emergent properties that are coming out from the same base, as it were. And they are revealing, as it were, continual forms of consciousness in a continuum of consciousness. So one of the properties of mind that we can see is this very thing that we're talking about, the dividing property. We experience it in ourselves. Mind goes by the laws of logic. The laws of logic include the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of the excluded middle. In a nutshell, what it means is that the mind centers itself in something. And once it does that, that becomes its identity. Whatever is its identity, anything that is not that identity becomes an other, and a distinct other. There is no middle. The middle is excluded. It's a contradiction, as it were. So A and not A. And this divisioning of the world causes a certain kind of experience, an experience that is divided and fragmented. Sri Aurobindo is not saying that this experience of a divided and fragmented world is an invention of our minds. But he is pointing to the fact that our mind is carrying out this kind of function because these laws of mind are operating as the fundamental structure of our universe. And so we may think about mind not just as an individual property or a property of an individual, but as a cosmic plane of consciousness. And this cosmic plane of consciousness at its very heights, that has ranges that become more and more universal, ultimately leading to a universal or cosmic consciousness. That kind of cosmic mind at its very heights has this dividing property by which it creates a universe of this type of appearances of division. In Indian spiritual thought, going way back to the Upanishads, and particularly being given a great amount of prominence from the 8th or 9th century, we have the idea of Maya. And many people have heard this term Maya, And immediately, as soon as they hear the term Maya, they think of an illusory property, a property of making illusions. And this idea of making illusions, Maya as an illusion maker, comes from these views that there is a certain kind of creation of the world as a divided world. It's an appearance. So the machine that creates this kind of divided appearance is a mental machine, not our minds, but the cosmic mind. The cosmic mind uses the functions of logic to center itself in different individualities and splits them in creating centers of existence that treat everything else as other. This is the problem of Maya. Now, what Sri Aurobindo is going to point out and what Haridas Chaudhuri hones in on in this chapter is that this mechanism of the cosmic mind is not the final word of our cosmos. That itself, it is a mechanism that is being operated or created as a self-manifestation of something that is behind it, which is the supermind. And so Maya, its origin is in supermind, but its function in supermind is not the same as its function in overmind or mind, cosmic mind. The difference is that it is its own creative power by which it is dividing itself. That's why Maya in the supermind is called divine Maya. Haridas Chaudhuri will point this out. The difference between divine Maya and overmind Maya is that divine Maya knows that its divisions, its self-differentiations are its own. It never loses sight of its oneness. The world is differentiated but not divided. This is a phrase Sri Aurobindo uses. But once we come into overmind, it's as if it draws a veil on the one and empowers the experience of the many. And why does it do this? And there comes the other really important idea of Sri Aurobindo, which is that by doing that, it maximizes individuality. And this maximization of individuality makes two things possible. A loss of the one that propels a journey, which may be called the journey of evolution, and a play of the many by which the one experiences itself through relationality. These may be considered the meanings or purposes of the entire cosmos. And it leads to the idea that we as human beings, where we find ourselves, have become conscious of this tremendously, deep problem of fragmentation. It is not only a problem that is ahistorical, it is, but it is also acutely historical. Our age is an age in which fragmentation of individuals, of peoples, of animals, of our relationship with animals, relationship with the earth, relationship with other cultures, has been exacerbated to an extreme extent, so that we are almost on the verge of extinction. And so this problem is not just a mental problem. It's not just a philosophical problem. It's an existential problem of our times. And the solution to this problem is a change in our own consciousness, where we can actually experience reality as differentiated but not divided, the one as the many and the one in the many, that Haridas Chaudhuri is pointing out from Sri Aurobindo. In doing that, it is possible to bring about a changed reality for the human, and even possible for activating this consciousness, the integral consciousness, the supramental consciousness in a collective life as a kind of field of our own experimentation towards it, forming a new type of society. So this is the philosophy of the divine life, according to the second chapter. And then the third chapter of this book is called The Aim of Integral Yoga. And this is where Haridas Chaudhuri is taking us into the other great book, Synthesis of Yoga, because yoga is the praxeology, what kind of practice, what kind of methodical practice, what kind of practical psychology do we need to practice to get to this integral consciousness? And here he points out again that this notion of coming into contact, yoga as a union, as a uniting of our individual separative states of consciousness with some kind of universal or cosmic consciousness, that is yoga, is not a standard one solution fits all kind of thing. It isn't that, the idea of perennialism. So Haridas Chaudhuri is coming at it from this viewpoint that there are many different kinds of yogas that have developed in India and elsewhere. He considers Sufism to be a yoga, Christian mysticism to be a yoga, and all these paths towards spiritual realization. He's using the term yoga for them. Each one of them is a set of practices and a set of experiences, and ultimately a ontological change, a change which can be called a realization of reality. Reality becomes different. And sometimes in our age, where we have, our modern age, where we have come to know others and their experiences, we have tried to come to terms with that. We have to realize that whatever our own religions and our own understandings have led us to are not the only things that exist in the world. So we've come to the notion of perennialism. And the image of perennialism is sometimes given as many rivers that go to the ocean. And then there's another image, which is many paths go to the mountaintop. In these kinds of images, we are really looking at a goal which is a transcendental goal. A goal in which the paths are cancelled once the goal is reached. The river exists no more once it enters the ocean. The path ceases to be distinct once one reaches the mountaintop. But if we are to take, for example, a kind of a modern image, a more contemporary image, the image of the hologram. The hologram, where 3D hologram, where sometimes you get these holograms where more than one, sometimes two, sometimes three images have been superimposed so that there's a sense of depth to it. And when you look at it from one angle, you're seeing one picture, but you look at it from another angle, you see another picture. Sometimes if you look at it after knowing the pictures that are in between, you can see all pictures at once. But it's more fuzzy when you're trying to do that. It's as if you see parts of each picture intermingled with each other. But you know that there's a number of pictures there. It's a glimpse into a kind of consciousness in which all these realities may coexist as distinct, and at the same time as one. So this kind of a reality in which the individual paths, the plurality of our experiences of the divine, because the divine is infinite. There may be infinite experiences of the divine. Can we rise to a certain consciousness in which these infinite experiences of the divine are all had at once in their separateness and together? It's a different kind of consciousness than that which the mind can have. Because as we discussed, the mind operates by centering itself in each reality and treating the other realities as different or subordinate. So in this chapter, the third chapter, Haridas is going to look at Sri Aurobindo's own diaries, where he poses the problem in terms of 4 terms, Sanskrit terms: Shuddhi, Mukti, Siddhi, and Bhukti. So Shuddhi means purification. Mukti means liberation. Siddhi means perfection, and sometimes latent powers that are latent in us. And Bhukti means enjoyment. And the way he shows it in terms of the different disciplines of spirituality. Like, for example, Hatha Yoga, which today is called yoga. In most of the world, when you use the term yoga, they mean the physical postures of Hatha Yoga. So he points out that Hatha Yoga is a yoga which privileges Kaya Shuddhi, which means the purification of the body, to attain to Siddhi, which is the latent powers that are inside us, because it's an aspect of the larger field of Tantra. Tantra empowers spiritual powers as well as enjoyment of these powers and life. See, so Bhukti, Siddhi, sometimes one is subordinated Shuddhi, or when we come to Raja Yoga, we find purification Shuddhi leading to Mukti, but Bhukti and Siddhi are subordinated or not that important. So in a similar way, he'll point to the 3 major yogas, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, and show how different realizations are made possible by each of them. But can we have them all together? Can we have an experience in which each part of our being finds its spiritual fulfillment, but also realizes that it coexists in an integral whole? That would be an integral consciousness. And getting to that point means opening up different approaches inside us and also being open to something that integrates them. Sometimes when we talk about integral studies in California Institute of Integral Studies, we reduce it to the mind, the emotions, and the body. Thinking, feeling, and acting, let's say. But that's not what the integral is. The integral does empower each of these, but it's talking about, can we find a consciousness to which these differences in kind are actually differences of degree, that integrates them, not by mashing them together, but by retaining each in its complete freedom and total self-realization, but also as another kind of consciousness in which it coexists with all the others as one reality. So this is the integral consciousness, and the aim of the integral yoga is the attainment of that consciousness, which is going to be what Haridas will consider in the rest of this book. Thank you.